about 13, 14 years ago, I was pursuing a career in law enforcement. I thought that was the route that I wanted to take with my life, and during that time was shortly after the invasion of Iraq had happened, and a lot of veterans were coming home saying, hey, we're done, we don't want to keep deploying. So when you went to apply for a police department, they were getting preference points. It's like, hey, the only way I'm going to make myself competitive to be a police officer is to join the military. And if you're going to do it, why not do it right? So I joined the Marine Corps.
I don't think I was adequately prepared for, I mean, no one's like, oh, you married someone in the military, you know, this is what's going to happen, this is what to expect. Like, they don't tell you that. They're like, oh, just, you know, be there for them. But I just don't think that there's ever a way that I'm ever, even now, going to be able to be there for him, because I've never been there. And even if I, you know, had been there, I never went through the same things he went through. It's just very hard to relate on that sense.
10 years total. The time I served in the Marine Corps was 10 years. During that time, I did deploy 3 times. My first deployment was to Iraq. We left on ship with the Navy on what's known as a Marine Expeditionary Unit. We traveled through the Western Pacific, and essentially, if you've ever seen any of the movies in NBC, something comes up, we're that 911 response team. So that's what we were trained for, a lot of non-lethal stuff, riot control, different things like that. That one, we landed in Iraq, had some issues with our gear. There was a convoy that hit a IED, melted a bunch of our gear. So we went from being an artillery battery to an infantry company overnight. So now we are doing combat patrols. I did 136 patrols in search of IEDs in my time in Iraq. When the reality sets in that you could very possibly not come home, there is an element of fear that's there. The drive to ensure that you do your best at that point, that you don't make that mistake, that's what keeps you alive. You literally live every day knowing that you have to be your best. You have to be better than the guy looking for you. We definitely did not come back complete. We lost some few, we had some guys that got injured. And it's very difficult to live with that. Coming home from my first one, it was very different. First time in combat, first time seeing anything of that magnitude and severity, to actually see a body not living. I was not at that point in time responsible, in my opinion, for having to take anyone else's life. It was so I didn't have that looming over me, my first deployment. Last deployment was Afghanistan. That was in 2010, and spent the first 3 months in what is known as Fiddler's Green. It was an artillery base that was out there. And the northern area of Afghanistan started getting torn up really bad. A lot of infantry guys were getting hurt. And again, I was artillery, we're support. And they said, hey, we need you guys up north. So we took 2 days to travel from southern Afghanistan in vehicles to northern Afghanistan. We hit so many IEDs en route, we had to camp in the middle of the desert, unsecured. We essentially stayed up all night to make sure that we stayed alive. Next morning when we could see, we drove into where our fire base was. The Army cleared out an area. It was a 300-meter triangle on the ground. They bermed it up about 5 feet, and that's where we lived for 3 months. And all we did was shoot artillery. Day and night, I supported 13 countries, to include our own, different branches of service, shooting a lot of different rounds, but mainly the Excalibur round, which is a GPS-guided round. Essentially turns our howitzer into a giant sniper rifle, and we can shoot them 18 miles.
The first one he came back, it wasn't super apparent. He had episodes, but it wasn't anything crazy. After he came back, which is the second one that we were together, his third in total, there was just a difference. I mean, he was nervous about stuff. He couldn't sit with his back, like not to a wall. We'd go into a restaurant and he'd get overwhelmed. Everything would make him super upset. Crowded places were just stressful. We just avoided that altogether because I'm like, no one can handle him being that. He'd get so worked up, no one would have a good time.
So the problem was, coming home from my last one, was the realization that I had shot a lot of rounds in combat. The Marine Corps glorified it. They gave me an award for eliminating a sniper. And, you know, drinks were bought in for me. It was celebrated. It was this big thing. But what they don't tell you is I don't care what the situation is, knowing that you killed someone ain't cool. My kids idolize the fact that I'm a Marine, but they don't know what happened. So, again, living with that, I ran and gunned as hard as I could while I was in, and I got beat up pretty bad, hurt my back and my shoulder real bad, and again my head. So, what that led to was I was stationed out in Oklahoma teaching. They said, hey, we don't want you to deploy again.
It was different. It was rough, you know. I don't think, he couldn't get settled there.
Got some stuff coming up and it's just not making sense. Me and my wife aren't getting along as well as we want to. And they start putting me on pills. And I go from this wonderful, outstanding Marine to a zombie. I'm falling asleep at my desk and I'm supposed to be teaching young kids, 18, 19-year-olds coming in the Marine Corps. I mean, I was that image. I'm the guy they put in front of them because that's how good I was at my job. And now I'm falling apart and I can't pull it together.
He was on so many different medications. Sometimes he was a complete zombie. I mean, he'd be sitting there and like, he'd be drooling and we're just looking at him and I'm like, dude, is there anybody in there? And he would just be off in La La Land and it would be days and days and days. And there was nothing. And he was up to about 13 pills a day and they'd just change him. He'd get side effects, his tongue would go numb, his face would go numb, he'd have, you know, issues eating, his weight would fluctuate constantly because this pill did this and this pill did that. He had liver issues. And then there was other times where he was just off, like anything would set him off. He'd get angry, he'd get mad, then he'd be super emotional, things would make him cry. He'd just be sitting there and start crying because he'd think of something in his head and he would, you know, flashbacks, that kind of stuff. So, I mean, there are so many different reactions to everything they had him on. And he'd go in and say, now I'm having this reaction. Okay, let's just put you on something else. And it'd be such a drastic change from one to one to one to one to one to one. And then on top of that, they had him on pain medications instead of trying to fix the problem. Here's some more morphine, here's some more Vicodin, here's some more this. And eventually, when I had Jackson, he's like, I can't be on, we brought him here to California, they read his medical record and they said, you're lucky you're so big because if you weren't, you'd be dead right now. All the pain medications they had him on, he would have died.
Their answer is pills. I've been on pretty much every head med you can imagine. I've got about 4 pages of just different prescriptions they tried through the Army hospital while I was stationed in Fort Sill. And nothing really was working right. It would work for a short amount of time and then it would seem like this roller coaster ride where all of a sudden the ground would just come out from underneath me. Never really had a balance on it. My wife put it best lately. She was like, you know, during that time, she would wake up in the morning and have no idea who was next to her. It could be a good day, it could be a bad day. It was never consistent. I'd never been on anything like that before. So that realization, what those pills were doing to me, I decided to find a different life. I wanted to take my life back. So I decided, as the Marine Corps processing me out at that point, saying, hey, we're not gonna keep you, you're done. Accepting that was really difficult.
I trusted doctors with my husband's life. And he easily could have been dead with everything they had him on. So when I was having our second son, he was going through a morphine withdrawal. And it was awful. I mean, he was shaking and he said he would never touch a pain medic. He won't even take Tylenol, Advil for a headache because he's so afraid to have that happen to him again.
And because the medication was so terrible and so dirty there, I decided to grow my own. Had never grown a plant before in my life when I started doing it. What happened was as I was medicating with the cannabis, I found out that I didn't need opiates to manage my pain, especially as I started getting better cannabis. So again, in that pursuit, I was trying to accomplish that, to continue that process. What happened 2 years into that fight is March 24th of this year, I am now prescription pill free. I don't take any prescription pills. My only medication is cannabis. My quality of life is better. My first semester here at Saddleback College, I failed out of my classes miserably. on the cocktail of pills that they were giving me. Now I'm maintaining a very, very nice GPA in and around 2.5, and all I use is cannabis. It allows me to be in a classroom and have a teacher turn the lights off, because something that simple is very difficult. There is definitely a culture within our society that uses cannabis completely recreationally. And I don't see that there's an issue with that. But what I think happens is that within the elements of people that are looking at cannabis as a group, they are focusing more on that entity because it's out there more. It's on social media more. They're not showing true life patients like myself that not only am I living now, I am surviving. I don't fear my own life. I'm able to breathe. I'm able to get up out of the bed in the morning and accomplish the day. My kids know that Daddy's there, and they're happy when they see me. Everyone in my family supports it, whether they agree or disagree, from my Mormon grandmother in Arkansas. She has seen me as a zombie, heard me attempt to talk to her on the phone as a zombie on pills, and then be able to hold a normal conversation with her as I did before ever being in the Marine Corps, as I did when I was essentially, as people like to say, happy me. And I don't like to throw that stigma at the Marine Corps. I don't think that they made the unhappy or the sad me, but there's some elements of life that I guess they forget to mention that you're gonna have to deal with afterwards. And you know what? Some deal with it better than others, and for me, it's been a very difficult road. Again, I didn't know what I was doing. I had some really small, terrible looking plants. And in the process, at the time, I was still on all the prescription meds, and it caused, as my wife and I are calling it, an episode.
He was on all these medications, and he would start to have withdrawals, and I think too much of it got to him. And I went next door to call for help. My hope was to get like a hospital setting.
I wasn't myself. She said the look in my eyes, I wasn't even there. She didn't even think I was alive. I was just completely stone dead to the world. I was very aggressive, and I scared her. She ran out of the house, and she called the police. She said, hey, my husband, he suffers from PTSD. He's been deployed sometimes. You know, can you please come help our situation? They did. They came to our situation with 5 officers armed to the teeth with a dog. They took me out of my home.
They searched our house illegally, and then they found the plants. They took 9 plants, but half of them were tomato plants.
And incarcerated me for about 11 days. And in that process told me that my punishment was up to the possibility of life imprisonment for growing cannabis in Oklahoma.
They told me I had to press charges, otherwise they were going to charge me with the same thing. And at the time, I called numerous times. I called the DA, please, will you just let me drop it? You know, I don't want to do this. They said, well, there's a 2-year statute of limitation. If you drop it, then we will charge you. That was just the way it was. I had a lawyer at the time. He went in and talked about it, and he said, don't drop it, or you're going to jail. And I was like, well, we have 2 kids. One of us has to stay with the children. So we left it in place, and then right at the 2-year mark, when I would have been able to drop it, they made him sign that deal.
I asked the judge if I could come to California in a hope to try and get my life square so that he could see that I'm not this bad individual that the crimes were making me out to be. And he agreed to it. I came to California and again started trying to live my life. About 18 months ago, had some issues with it. Stress overtook me. Some of the deployment stuff came up. It was a really bad Memorial Day for me. And I ended up hospitalized twice in Long Beach, VA. Voluntarily, I needed help. I needed to get the medication under control because my life was still so unstable on the pills. They hospitalized me. Their recommendation was that I continue my pill regimen and never touch cannabis again.
Absolutely. The medication that they gave him was like the worst thing that ever happened to us. We thought that the PTSD symptoms were the bad thing, but it wasn't. It was the medications they gave him, because the PTSD, you know, easily he could have talked through it, worked through it without using all these medications, and they never used it to treat him. They just covered all these symptoms that he kept getting from other things. So, you know, we fully support him.
Shortly after that time period, because I was hospitalized, the legal system of Oklahoma decided that I was a danger because I didn't go to court. I went to the hospital instead. So they sent the marshals after me. I had about 7 unbadged, ununiformed individuals in everything from a tow truck to a Chevy pickup truck swarm me at my son's preschool, which is also located on a church grounds in Alicia Parkway. We're dropping off. Everyone's dropping off their kids for preschool. So my wife and sons get to experience me being taken away by a bunch of men with guns. To this day, my son Levi still doesn't understand that they were police officers. I was literally arrested and in the back of a vehicle before the first marked car showed up. It was a very scary situation. The sentence went from life to now 5 years. And where I'm at now is coming up on October 19th. The state of Oklahoma wants me to serve 5 years for using cannabis to treat PTSD.
I think it's unfair that what's happening now, the punishment they're trying to give him, when we first started, they wanted to give him life. And I go, for what? Like, to lose his entire life. And not to mention, it was a PTSD episode that happened following 3 deployments. And they gave us no help. They gave us no nothing. Okay, you're out of the Marine Corps, now what? So to have to give 10 years of his life to our country, and now to have to give up the rest of his life for a plant that he was trying to heal himself for doing something for our country, is a little disheartening.
Some of the statements that have been made about comments in regards to some of the other lawyers, essentially the prosecuting team, their thoughts, and not necessarily do they have a character opinion of me, but they are really wanting me to do time for this crime, and nobody can really understand why. They convicted me as a felon, and they think it's completely fine. My military record of doing all these great things and getting some really awesome awards for doing it is gone. I want to be an architect. How? What grad school is going to accept a felon at this point? So it's very scary to think about how you can overcome this, in my eyes, and that's what I'm trying to do now, is to fight it so that I don't have to overcome any more obstacles.
My husband works with the Weed for Warrior Project, so all of his friends, all of the people he works with, all of them are veterans. All of them use cannabis. None will take the medications the VA gives them.
Of incarceration they would to give me. Some people have said, go for mental health because of the PTSD, go for drug court because of it was cannabis related. The problem is that whether I'm hospitalized or imprisoned, they will take cannabis away from me as an option, and they're going to put me back on pills. And there's about 3 people that know this, but the reason I walked away from pills the last time is I was chest deep in Salt Creek at about 12:30 in the morning, about to swim to San Clemente Island. I knew I wasn't going to make it. That's why I walked away from pills. That's my fear from being back on pills.
I think he'll kill himself, honestly. Chris has a very, I'm sorry. He has a really, really hard time being in close places as it is. To be in there with no medication, with guys. Chris is a big guy, and in jail, they pick on the biggest guy. He does something, to defend himself, anything, and he gets more and more time in there. He loves his children to death, like they are the air he breathes. If he is in jail, I don't know what happens. 5 years, even if that's the maximum they give him. Our daughter is 4 months, or she'll be 4 months on the 22nd. She'll be 5. She won't know who he is. That's a lot of time to be away from our family. I don't know what will happen to him if he goes.